Good morning once again, y'all. It is such a pleasure to join you in worship this morning and to share a message based on the writings of one of my favorite authors, Bell Hooks. Now, I want to start off this morning with a trivia question. So get ready to shout out the answer if you're in the sanctuary, or type it in the chat if you're joining us virtually. The question is, what was the first movie ever shown at the White House? What was the first movie ever shown at the White House? And a couple of clues. This was in 1915 when Woodrow Wilson was president. And there was a 2016 film by the same name, directed by Nate Parker. Wonderful. I see an answer in the chat, and there may have been some in the sanctuary that I didn't hear, but Birth of a Nation is the answer. Congratulations, Karen Velasek. And this is, as you all know, you may know, it's a vile, bigoted, scaremongering film in the form of a horribly racist representation of the Reconstruction era in America. Ava DuVernay describes it in her wonderful documentary 13th in terms of the long-lasting impact that film had on the racial imagination of Americans. Here in the American South, where I live, it's estimated that over 80% of the population had seen the film during those early years of its circulation in the 19-teens. The Birth of a Nation is an unfortunate example of how popular culture, like movies and TV show, can be hugely influential on the world around us, and how, therefore, those things have power. I am greatly indebted to Gloria Jean Watkins, more popularly known by her authorial pseudonym Bell Hooks, for the concept of cultural criticism. She passed into the ancestral realm in 2021, and her departure was a massive loss to the movement for collective liberation. Her notion of enlightened witnesses encompasses the idea that by witnessing, by experiencing culture and media in our own world, that as critical viewers of those things, we have the opportunity to dissect them, to counteract the conservatizing representations that they may enact, and to use those representations instead as common reference points for our critiques of the world as it is, and for our imaginings of the world as we want it to be. In Hooks's interview entitled "Cultural Criticism and Transformation," she states, quote, "My own sense is that the most enabling resource that I can provide as a critic or an intellectual professor is the capacity to think critically about our lives. I think thinking critically is at the heart of anybody transforming their life. I really believe that a person who thinks critically can find ways to transform their lives that can be deeply and profoundly meaningful." Hooks lifts up cultural critical thinking as a form of power available to all, regardless of social status and wealth. Can I get an amen for that? Amen. Critical thinking is a tool for change that we can wield, no matter how gerrymandered or lobbyist influenced our elections are. In order to wield that tool, Hooks proposes that we become, quote unquote, enlightened witnesses, saying, being enlightened witnesses, when we watch representations, means we are able to be critically vigilant about both what is being told to us and how we respond to what is being told. That is how we can both resist certain kinds of conservatizing representation and at the same time create new and exciting representations. Raising consciousness and critical awareness is fundamental to the project of imagining and creating a new and better world. It's what allows us to see things in their broader systemic context. I think the best example of this comes from Hooks's analysis of rap music. She says, quote, rap music is so diverse in its themes, its styles, its content, but the rap that gets in national news is always rap music that perpetuates misogyny, that is most obscene in its lyrics. It's the perfect paradigm of colonialism. We think of rap music as a little third world country from which young white consumers take whatever they want. An honest accounting would have to acknowledge that young white consumers, primarily male, oftentimes suburban, get most energized in rap music by misogyny, obscenity, pugilistic eroticism, and therefore that form of rap began to make the largest sums of money. The young men who create a lot of rap music are not naive, and they know that they can make $1 million talking about obscene, misogynistic desires. When I was growing up in the 90s, I associated the music of Tupac Shakur with violence and danger. He was the victim of shooting attacks even before his death by shooting in 1996. It wasn't until I listened to his music as an adult that I picked up on themes like Tupac's support of the Black Panther Party, which his parents and godparents had been members of. In his posthumously released song, Changes, Tupac sings, I got love for my brother, but we can never go nowhere unless we share with each other. We got to start making changes, learn to see me as a brother instead of two distant strangers, and that's how it's supposed to be. I learned that the themes of the war on drugs, treatment of Black people by police, racial reconciliation, and poverty were all indispensable to Tupac's canon, and that he learned about these from his godmother, Assata Shakur, of the Black Panther Party herself and the Black Liberation Army. It took me years to see Tupac in this more positive light, to see him as a liberatory figure and not as an oppressive one, because of how the portrayals of him originally filtered down to me as a white child growing up in rural America. But Bell Hooks's framework of cultural criticism has helped me to accept Tupac more on his own terms and less in terms of how he had to appeal to a young white male suburban audience and how he was portrayed by a sensationalist media. Now, at this point, it's very fair if you're asking, what's the point of all of that? Can't I just like Tupac or not and let that be it? So let me offer an example of a real world TV show that's had consequences in the real world in the form of influencing a literal sitting Supreme Court justice. In 2007, Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia was talking at a public panel on jurisprudence. And he told them that torture was justifiable because of the actions of fictional secret agent Jack Bauer in the TV show 24. Scalia said, quote, Jack Bauer saved Los Angeles. He saved hundreds of thousands of lives. Are you going to convict Jack Bauer? And I think it's worth emphasizing that one of Bauer's catchphrases on this TV show is, if you don't tell me what I want to know, it's just a matter of how much it's going to hurt. Torture indeed. I promise y'all, I'm not trying to ruin the show 24 for anyone. It's a bad enough show on its own. But it's also a reminder that the stories that we tell have power, both directly and indirectly. That's why the Department of Defense provides access and resources to films like Captain Marvel, Top Gun, Black Hawk Down, and the Transformers series in exchange for those films portraying the military in a positive light. The director of Guardians of the Galaxy, James Gunn, is on the record acknowledging, quote, when a film uses military assets for free, those scripts have to get military approval to make sure the military isn't disparaged. This isn't a modern phenomenon in Hollywood, but in fact goes all the way back to the winner of the first Best Motion Picture Award given in 1929 to the film Wings, which used military equipment in filming locations. Now, did all of this stop me from going to see the film Top Gun Maverick in theaters last summer? Twice? Absolutely not. I'm not about to let the propagandists for capitalist imperialism get between me and watching Tom Cruise race a fighter jet on his motorcycle. I'm not asking anyone to boycott certain movies or to change their viewing habits so that they're watching the right thing instead of the wrong thing. That's the fun of being part of a non-dogmatic, covenantal religion that provides instruction not on what to believe, but on how to be together. A free and responsible search for truth and meaning doesn't mean that we stick our heads in the sand and ignore the outside world or protest Christian nationalist films that we have theological and political disagreement with. It's way more fun to watch those Christian nationalist films and make fun of how clumsily they're made. Rather, encouragement to growth, as dictated in our third UU principle, should lead us into deeper and more open conversation with each other about the world we want to create and whether and how that world is reflected in the art and culture we witness. I was so excited last winter to see Avatar 2, The Way of Water, because the first Avatar embodied the themes of multicultural collaboration, colonial resistance, and naturalistic harmony, as well as any film in my lifetime. And the second Avatar indeed expanded on those themes, bringing them from the forest to the ocean. These films are a great starting point for discussions about themes that can seem very abstract and difficult to find common reference points for. building collective imagination of the world we want to live in is a vitally important project during a time of transition and despair, such as we are now living through. For myself and my generation growing up, the most common and intricately detailed imaginary world we had for reference was that of Harry Potter. Its stories taught us that even an orphan living underneath the stairs can defeat authoritarian fascism if he is imbued with the power of love and friendship. They taught us about mentorship, collaboration, organization, trust, perseverance, and above all, courage. I have preached in the past a sermon called The Liberatory Message of Harry Potter, which people came to hear about the lessons in these children's novels related to social justice organizing. People came to the service in robes and waving wands, and at the end, we all chanted together about overcoming powerful enemies. Some of you may know where this is headed and why it's become more than a little heartbreaking. It's become more and more clear over the last 5 years that the author of the Harry Potter books, Joanne Rowling, is deeply transphobic. Rowling is what many describe as a trans exclusionary radical feminist, or TERF for short. She has repeatedly made bigoted and insensitive statements about trans women and stood by them even as her coworkers and her fans have discussed how harmful these statements have been. So many of us learned for the first time from her books how to have the courage to be our true selves, and to learn that Joanne herself didn't believe in that message in her heart it felt like a severe betrayal. The charitable interpretation of her words is that she believes trans women are stealing the valor of cisgender women who have fought for equity and gender justice in the past and today. The less charitable and I think more accurate interpretation of her stance is that Joanne herself is deeply uncomfortable with her own gender identity and with the overall notion of transness. In retrospect, transphobia is a common theme in both the Harry Potter novels and the mystery novels that Rowling wrote under her pen name, Robert Galbraith. The news of Joanne's transphobia was devastating, but for many of us, it was also an impetus to learning how to read critically, to analyze a piece of art beyond just whether we liked it or not, or whether the good guys won in the end. It prompted me to ask whether there really was a liberatory message in Harry Potter if the system of government at the end of this series of books was the same as it had been at the beginning. To ask why Hermione Granger wasn't the protagonist of these books all along. To ask why non-human species were used as a stand-in for non-white races throughout the canon of Western literature. If you're interested in those questions, I want to suggest a couple of podcasts, Oh Witch Please and The Gayly Prophet, where queer and trans activists and literary scholars go into them in a good deal of depth with a lot of sympathy and compassion. Y'all, the eighth principle that you use are considering, that we are contemplating, tasks us to build diverse, multicultural, beloved communities, and that is not a trivial task. It takes time and the courage to be vulnerable with one another. As Bell Hooks said, popular culture is where the pedagogy is. It's the common reference point for learning from one another and bringing our message of love's transformative power out into the world. If pop culture isn't your thing, bring us the full enthusiasm and passion of your obsessions. And I promise you'll find folks here to share and amplify that passion. If some aspect of popular culture is one of your obsessions, let us use that point of connection to enhance our collective imagination of a more just and equitable future. I want to leave us with the words of my favorite poet, Andrea Gibson, who says, "Pull all your strings, play every chord, never go a second hushing the percussion of your heart." May it be so, and may we be the ones to make it so.